Now here's the protection status report, probably one of the more useful reports here in Report Manager, SLA Violation Summary and Detail Report. Now what this is going to tell you is the total amount of failed jobs across the entire environment. It'll tell you why they failed. And it'll also tell you which host and which cluster it's on. So if you've got 30 CDSs and you had 15 SLA violations on CDS number 2, it'll say you had 15 SLA violations on CDS number 2, and those violations were on these hosts and on these applications. Now, as you can see, this is it's a good looking chart. It covers everything, but we probably want to get a little bit more granular if we are seeing some of those violations. And so we've got the SLA violation detail report. Very similar. The other one is the SLA violation summary. This is SLA violation detail. And this is where we actually do a little bit more of a deep dive, and we'll actually start to see some error codes. So on the far left, that whole column is which appliance it was on. Now that's which CDS or Sky instance the SLA violation occurred on. The next column over is the host and application. So if you have, say, a SQL host, named SQL host, but on that SQL host, you have 4 SQL instances, it will tell you it was these 4 instances that had the violation. They lived on this host. That host is protected by this CDS, and it all happened on this date and this time. And here's your error message. Now, this is a great place to catch misconfigurations, and it's also a great place to look for trends. So if you had expirations disabled, and you were failing expiration jobs, it would say, hey, you had 14 SLA violations for image expiration. That's images that have gone beyond the retention date and should be cleared, but you had expirations off. So it'll tell you these 15 failed, and they failed because your expirations were shut off. Or these 7 snap jobs didn't run, and they didn't run because the scheduler for this particular policy has been disabled. So lots of great little information like that, but then it also has the more, we'll say, meaty technical details. So the Actifio connector failed to create VSS snapshot. Those error messages that you're going to see in your UI, or that are going to be caught by your trap receiver, that same syntax is all going to be here. And there's a unification of all of these error messages through every place that we report them. So if you see them in email, if you see them in your UI, if you see them in this report, they're all going to use the same verbiage. And we do that so if you're trying to look up some information on this error, if you're in our knowledge base or our document set, that it's consistent language through every repository of information that we've got. So you're not going to look at an error on this screen and then look at it in your UI and then be misled because we've changed the wording. It's all going to be uniform. So when you do your search in our federated search engine, it will then go through, it'll look at all of our KB articles, it'll look at all of the documents, and those KBs and docs all use the exact same verbiage that you're going to see in these reports and in the UI, which makes these errors copy-paste searchable, which is really what we were going for. The next really great at-a-glance report is going to be the daily protection status. Now, I can look at this report and I don't necessarily need to know really much of anything. It's very intuitive. We look and we see green, we're going to assume that's good, and we're right. And we use the standard green, yellow, red schema. And again, you don't need to be an expert in Actifio to understand that when you see red on a report, something's not right. Now, just to touch on this really quick, and I'm going to provide you with a much more in-depth resource for Report Manager once we start to exit this section of this webinar. But I did want to point these things out to you, as I do think they're some of the more useful components of Report Manager for daily administration. So if we look at this report, we can see things generally look okay. We've got a lot of green. We've got that series of red at the bottom, though. And that's telling. Something happened on this date here, where we see our first red dot. And that's both useful and interesting. It lets us know exactly where we need to go to start to look to figure out what went wrong. It lets us know that something on that day probably changed and didn't revert back, because we can see the jobs didn't start working again. They continued to fail. And then we can do a more deep dive into either that operation, why our snapshot's not working, why is dedupe not working, or if it's just one particular op on a particular app, we can look in, for example, in the example that I have on the screen, this is one particular host and application, and it's failing all jobs. All snapshots, all dedupe, all remote dedupe is failing. We probably have an offline host. But we'd really want to dig into that to really make any conclusion. But the point is we can just take a quick look at this. And once we're done with our implementation, we've done kind of our testing, our IOQ, everything should be working. When this report gets mailed to me in the morning, it should just be green, maybe a couple points of yellow. And just to cover the yellow so you know what it means, that means the job has not completed yet, but it still has a chance to finish within the window. So maybe we check the report at 2:30 in the morning and the dedupe window is still open. We've still got another 90 minutes before we want to start switching over into snap mode to do our business for the day. So we could see that some of this report is actually showing some yellow because those jobs are either in progress or they're scheduled and still have time to run within the allotted window. Thank you for joining us for another YouTube Tech Tip video. If you like the content you're seeing on this channel, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you will be alerted to any future content.